Okay, welcome everybody. I'm going to base most of what I'm going to do on this website here that I just pasted into the chat. Now, if you can't find this, or if you're watching a recording and you can't access the chat link, you can basically find this if you just do a Google search for Church History Library, a research guide, and you can include missionary. There's a few other research guides that you might be interested in as well. And so this is the first link that comes up is the link that I'm on, but this research guides link will take you to all of them. And then you can find specifically the one on missionaries, or you can see something else that you might be interested in for any kind of family history related stuff with records of the church. So back to missionaries, the missionary program, which goes back all the way to Joseph Smith's brother, who was one of the first ones called Samuel H. Smith in 1830. And for most people, it's the entry point of their family to the church, right? I want to say for most, but it is probably most people. There's occasionally people that have joined the church, but it wasn't through missionaries, right? So it's an important research topic because it'll cover the activities of your ancestors at the point they joined the church, or if your ancestors were missionaries, it'll cover that time period of their life as well. And there's a lot of insight that can be gained about their life and about their devotion to the church by researching their mission, finding out about companions, which is a really valuable untapped resource, because if the companion took a lot of photos, then somewhere out there are photos of your ancestor that you've maybe never seen. And so it would be really valuable to find out who the companions were, try to track down some of these photos, see if they kept any photos, see if they wrote a journal and mentioned your ancestor in their journal. So like most of my ancestors were not very literate. It seems like they didn't write very often. And so I don't really have a lot of journal entries from my ancestors, but it would be an absolute treasure to find my ancestor mentioned in somebody else's journal. So with that in the background, here's the reason why we want to do this kind of research. I'll just talk briefly about the history of missionary work. And on this research guide is a timeline. This might be useful to kind of help understand when you're dealing with a missionary and the time period that they're serving, that their mission is going to be different than other times. So you can see some of the highlights on here. The first single women to be called as full-time missionaries. So there were sister missionaries before that, but they were almost always called with their husbands and serving with their husband. And so you could kind of make an argument that maybe they weren't actually missionaries, but the works that they did was very much missionary-like, and I think we count them as missionaries. So other things on here, like missionaries should receive their endowment. Missionaries were restricted during World War II so that they didn't tap into the fighting force that was required for that. There's all kinds of little points in here that might apply to the missionary that you're researching. So that's worth checking out. The other thing on this page that I'd like to point out are these online resources. And my job specifically at the Church History Library when I worked there was to work on this church history biographical database, which is a premier spot for listing out members of the church. Now, eventually, this is going to get bigger. It's going to include leadership positions, possibly even including down to like Relief Society presidents and bishop and that kind of a thing. It's not there yet. Right now, it has pioneers, missionaries, and the Mormon battalion. But since we're looking at missionaries, we can use this for quite a lot of research. So we just go to See All Missions, which is one way to approach this. If we're looking up a missionary, then you might just want to search for that missionary by name. Why don't we start with looking, since it's Cinco de Mayo, let's look at the Mexican mission. There are a couple of unique things about the Mexican mission. One is that you can see on the map that at some point, so it's interesting, in the early part of the church, missions were not really tied to geography as much as tied to people. And so when it's called the Mexican mission, the implication is that it's to serve the Mexican people. And at that time, and even now today, the states that are highlighted there are where a lot of Mexicans would have lived, including Texas, but for some reason that wasn't part of the mission at the point of this map. And so at one point, and it's probably here in the timeline, well, I know it's up here in the front part. So there's this little introduction to the mission. And during the Mexican Revolution, missionary work was hampered. Missionaries and colonists were evacuated in 1912. And so, but the mission actually stayed open. We scroll down here until we can see 1912. We can see that Ray Pratt was the president, and he was the president from 1907 to 1925. So throughout that evacuation, what they did was they just moved the mission home and mission office to El Paso, Texas, and then eventually it was moved to Los Angeles, California. And so, because there were missionaries in Mexico, it seemed easier to have the office in the United States. This similar thing happened with the Japanese mission. The Japanese mission was opened in Japan, and then after a while, the headquarters moved to Hawaii. And the focus was teaching Japanese people, but they mostly focused on teaching the Japanese people who lived in Hawaii. So a couple other things. So I've already shown this little intro, which would be a good place to start. And suppose you've got a missionary in mind, but you want to learn more about their mission. This would be a good place to kind of get a brush up. Another good place for that kind of background research is down under sources for almost all of them, most all of them. There should be a link to the Encyclopedic History of the Church. This is a publication that was published in 1941 by the church historian at the time, Andrew Jensen. And if we click on this, it'll just say it's an encyclopedic entry, but you can see Mexican mission is on there. Another thing that's really cool about this is actually all of the awards from about 1930 and earlier are listed in here as well. And so, and sometimes it talks about the founding of the ward, but since we're talking about missionaries, that's different. But this is a good source to find out information about wards that early in the church that your ancestors may have belonged in. So this is a couple of pages here of information about the mission, including some of the earlier missionaries that were called, when it was organized, and the areas that they covered, and other interesting things about the mission. I think they even cover the Mexican Revolution and the evacuation of the saints and missionaries at the time. That's here in this column there. So this is a great source. Like I said, it's the Encyclopedic History. It's available digitally through BYU Idaho, but you can also find it just by, like I did, just going to the mission in the biographical database and then looking at the sources down below, and you can find that. So another stuff down here in the bottom under the sources, if there's any kind of articles or something that talk about the history of the mission, those have been pasted in there as well. But let me share another source that's also good for finding articles about the mission. This is a website. It's a little bit cryptic because it just has an abbreviation and not a lot of title, but it's the Studies in Mormon History Collection. And it's actually pretty detailed in topics. So the Southern Indian Mission, which is not a very prominent mission, but there's more than 200 articles in here about that. If we do the same thing for the Mexican mission, we find, again, like quite a lot of articles in there. This would be a good one to go through and see if your ancestors are mentioned. So there's journal articles in here, there's books. So here's a diary of somebody who served in the Mexican mission. Most of the stuff in here this one's not, but a lot of these articles are going to be digital. If you just click on it, you'll find a URL down at the bottom, someplace in the thing. So here's the URL for this one, and then it'll just take you straight to the article and you can read it. If they're not digital, then you'll have to either request them at the BYU library, which is probably the most likely place for them to be, or you can sometimes find them other places as well. If it's a journal article from a periodical that maybe is digital, but on its own website. So this is a great place to look for as well, to find things. Okay, so now we've kind of been doing like top level, almost like mission research and not missionary research, right? So let's do some actual missionary research, and we'll kind of use some of these same things, but not quite. What I'm going to do for this is I'm going to sign in up at the top with my church account. Now that I've signed in with my church account, one of the options is show my ancestors. So this is the easiest way to look at who I'm related to in the database. And Okay. I guess I have to sign in again. Sorry. Okay. So here's a list of people that I'm related to in the database. A lot of them are pioneers that are in here. And it looks like, though, those are the only two direct ancestors that I have that are missionaries. So John Robinson was a missionary in the British mission. And we can see on his page and down on his timeline, it's got where he was living, Sanpete, and when he was called on his mission in 1875, he was set apart by Brigham Young Jr. and some other details. Now, most of this information comes, and if we go back to this online sources, the second item in here is the Missionary Department Mission Registry. This is where most of that information comes from. It would list the name of the missionary. It would list who set them apart, what priesthood office they were in, if they were in a quorum, which quorum they were in, where they were living when they were called, all of that fun stuff. And if you go down under the sources, we can actually look at that. It's this Missionary Department Mission Registers. So there's two for him, even though he only served one mission. And the reason for that is that Volume A was actually not written very well. And so somebody went back and wrote it in better handwriting in Volume B. So it's the same information, but we put both of them on there just in case there was a discrepancy. It might have been from, the transferring of the writing. So, like I said, same thing, Volume A and Volume B, same thing, but better handwriting in Volume B. So let's look at Volume B, and we can just see an example of this. Now, it's a whole ledger, and so one of the things that's useful is he's on line 1207. And so if we go through, we can go on the side here, and we can see there's line 1207. I don't know what that 46 is. Might be another like numbering system. Maybe like that's how many missionaries there were in that specific year or something like that. I don't know. Anyway, so we can see John Robinson, 1207. John Robinson, his father's name is Edward. If I can do this, I can see father and mother's maiden name is Elizabeth. And then we go over and we can see all of the information that's written out there. And so it's possible too that that the information when it was typed out and put in this has been incorrect. And so sometimes it's useful to look at the original and see that, oh no, it wasn't actually that they were saying, it's something else. I mean, some of you are probably much better at reading handwriting than others, but this is the good handwriting, remember? So anyway, so that's a great place to find information like that out. And then the other thing that's not linked down here usually, sometimes it is, but it's not on this person, and that is entries in their mission history, in the mission history for that mission. So the best way to find that is like we did to the Mexican mission, we just go to the page for the British mission, which we can do by clicking on this British mission, or if you already know that's what you're looking for, you can go and find it the way that I did the Mexican mission, which was just to type that in there. So British mission, and if we skip all of the presidents, which there were a lot of, go down to the bottom, under the sources, it is the mission manuscript history and historical report. I'm going to open that in a new tab, but I want to point out that the British mission and the Western States mission are both done this way. They have a separate index. Most of the time, the index is actually inside the collection, but for the British mission and the Western States mission, the index is separate. So I'm opening that in a separate window too. So here's the manuscript history. That was the first thing I loaded. This is just a history of the mission from, chronological 1837, and it goes all the way to 1971 when the mission changed from the British mission to the England mission and kind of divided up and that kind of a thing. And this is the index to the mission history as well. So what I can do here is go to R, and this is these are kind of like this. You can see over here, they're cards. So RAB to READ, right? And so I want to find Robinson. It's going to be between ROD branch, Road Branch, and Rockingham Street. So it's in this somewhere. And these cards, you just kind of click on, and then I usually just change the number up here. Let's go to like 150. That's about half of it, less than half. Okay, so here's from Robinson. and we want John Robinson. So HIJ. So a little bit farther. Let's go to like 175 because there's probably a lot of Robinsons in here. A little bit less, 160. You get the idea. You just kind of jump around. So here's a John W. Robinson. Is that even my own ancestor? I think he might just be John Robinson, no W. So, and this is 1921 that the entries are in 1875 is when he was a missionary there, which is a little unique. He's older than most of the missionaries would have been. So this is probably him, John Robinson Sr., 1875, May 29th is the first entry. And if we go back to his page, and we can see May 11th is when he appears in the register. So you give him 14 days to make the trip. And this is him. That's the first entry for him, probably arriving in England. This was the only card for him. Sometimes there's multiple cards per person, but you can see that he's on a mission. This last one is probably them saying that he's departed on the mission. So to find these, and probably easier to just like open this up in a separate tab here. So that we can look on in the history here for, like I said, chronological 1875. May is going to be probably part 1. And so we're January, jump ahead about 75 pages. May 4th. Let's go to, I don't know, page 90. 18th, we're a little closer. 120. Okay, now we're past it. So go back. Eventually, all of this will be digital. And I mean, it is digital, but it's searchable, right? So the way that they did these, and this is kind of interesting, these were compiled not by the mission, but by the church history department. And they did this for every unit of the church, not just missions, but also for wards and stakes and branches until about 1980. And then that's when they realized we don't have enough staff to do all of the wards and missions and branches of the church and write histories for them. So they shifted it all back to everybody else and said, okay, now ward, you're responsible for submitting an annual history of your unit for the time to kind of replace this. When you're in the catalog, the church history catalog, and you're looking at, this is LR 1140 space 2. The space 2 is the manuscript history. That's the history that was compiled by the church historian's office until about 1980. And then if it's a series 3, so LR 1140 space 3, then it's the one that the history that was created later. So that should be apparent in here. So you can see this is 1841 to 1971. So they stopped doing this internal history in 1971. And so LR series 3 is probably going to say from 1972 to, 2016 or 2024, hopefully. Okay. So, well, and I have to spend the time to find, well, I don't know. I guess we're close. We might as well try to find this actual entry here. June 5th, and then May 26th, really close. Let's just go to the next page. May 29th. So the underline here is when it was indexed. So if it's underlined, William McKay has an entry somewhere in the index that we're looking at the index cards over here. And so there's John Robinson Sr. was in this group. They arrived on the steamship Wisconsin, and they left New York on the 18th at 3 p.m. They had a good passage. So that's good. So then the next time he's mentioned is probably going to be, it's possibly going to be like his assignment in the mission field. Sometimes these entries are the Millennial Star, and it'll say like that they were at this meeting, and these are the people that attended the meeting. Here's the people that bore their testimonies, or here's the people that spoke, that kind of thing. Let me go to just another page in this mission, and you can see another example. So here is the Millennial Star, volume 37, page 574, and they've just taken it and with scissors have just kind of cut and paste this entry from the Millennial Star in here. And so it's talking about the Kent district, Elder Ransom of Hastings, and so this is from the Millennial Star, and you can find this in the Millennial Star, but it's easier to find it here where you've got those index cards where you can see the entries. But let me show you how you would get to the Millennial Star. Let's say that that you saw it in there and it wasn't pasted, and you wanted to see the original. Maybe there's a photograph and you want to try to get a better photograph, or maybe you just want to find some more context. Go to the catalog, but it's just catalog.churchofjesuschrist.org, and search for Millennial Star. And this is frustrating because they don't, like, this is not what we want. We don't want the financial accounts of the Millennial Star. We want the Millennial Star. So one trick you can do is come up here and say church periodical and then do the search. And now it's showing you the Millennial Star, the actual thing you wanted to see. It's similar for like ensign. There's ensign wards. There's other places where ensigns are mentioned. And so when you're trying to find some like a church periodical, that's a nice way to do it. And so, and you can see here again, it's chronological order, and it goes pretty late too. So you see that these are individual images, and that's what they are, as images. But when we go to the later years, it's a PDF. And the difference is that the PDF is actually a little bit better for text search within the document here. So let's say that we were looking for Elder Anthony Middleton, right? If we just do a Control F search and then search for Middleton, it's actually showing on the screen here where that is, and then there's 5 other times in the thing where it's mentioned. So he's there, and then here's the London conference. So they had a conference in London, and he wrote the article about this conference, and it's mentioning the people that were there. It was pretty fancy. They had a senator there and Salt Lake attorney and all kinds of other people there too. That's kind of exciting. So you can see that that's a nice way to do it for some of these later issues, is you can actually search within the Millennial Star. And that's something that is a good technique to do as well. Suppose you've gone through the mission history and either not found a lot or otherwise not been able, or so when you go to this, it says like what years it's covered, right? And so if those years that are covered are not when your missionary was serving, then going straight to the periodical for the mission might be a good way to find that information out. So a good example of that is any United States mission. Let's do the Eastern States mission. Most missions have a periodical. Occasionally, they're not digital. So I noticed that the periodical for the Mexican mission was not digital, unfortunately. So at least not yet. They'll eventually get to it. Oh, and they don't have it listed here. Okay. This was not a good example. So the Eastern States did have a periodical, but it's the Liahona, the Elders Journal. And they should have it listed here because it covers all of the United States missions. And let's go. I'm just curious to see. I'm going to write them and tell them they need to link it again if they took it out for some reason. So here it is in the Southern States mission, Liahona, the Elders Journal. And so if we click on that, we can see the similar thing, right? Liahona, the Elders Journal is a periodical about the United States missions. And what it usually consists of are some front articles that are like a devotional nature. And then when you get in deep, it'll talk specifically, here's the report from the Northern States Mission. And so here's Elder John Russin is the president of the Wisconsin Conference. So the missionaries in Wisconsin, and he writes about that. And so, you'll find ancestors mentioned in these little, what do they call this section? It's like from the mission field or something like that, mission news. So here's Eastern States and the New England Conference, and they're talking about, let's see, Elder Lamb and Elgreen and Sister Siege Miller, all of these names that are people that are serving in the mission at the time. So you can go through this way. That's what I was getting at. You can go through this way and just kind of look at each issue of the Liahona Elders Journal for those missions or for whatever mission you're looking at. Each mission should have a periodical. Now, the mission periodicals don't often cover the whole thing. So, for example, Liahona Elders Journal starts in 1907. It actually started earlier than that, but it was only for the Central States mission. I think it was Central States. It was a separate mission, and so they have that as a separate run. But they decided they should have a periodical for all of the United States missions, and so they did that. The Millennial Star is the periodical for the British mission, and each mission should have its own periodical, but they often don't cover earlier than about 1900, 1905, 1910 is when most of these started. And then they all kind of stop after about, I don't know, this one goes to 1945. I've seen some that go to 1930 and some that go much later, go to the point where the ensign takes over and they do like a supplement for the ensign in their language. And then that will include like information about the missionaries serving in the field at that time. But let's see, if we go to the later years with this, I think we'll see the PDFs. Oh, no PDFs for this. So you can't search these, but you can look at them. And I think last time I showed a link of the church periodicals, which I should have pulled this up again. Church history. Yeah, church magazines and newspapers. This has the Millennial Star, the Liahona, the 1907. This was there was two. There was the Elders Journal and the Liahona, and they merged the two. The Liahona was the one for Samuel O'Benion was the president of the Central States Mission, and then the Elders Journal would have been right here. Elders Journal. No, that's this one, Southern States. So Southern States had the Elders Journal, Central States had the Liahona, and then they combined them to the Liahona, the Elders Journal, to cover all of the United States missions. But if you want to find just those, that's listed in here too. And you can see that we've got French periodical for the French mission. We've got the Swedish, the Northern Star. A lot of them follow after the Millennial Star, where they have some kind of star in the title. So the Scandinavian Sternen, or the Scandinavian Star for the Danish one. Italian is La Stella for the star. And so you can see some of the, like I said, there's some wide variation on what's covered. So the Italian Star goes from 1968 to 2020, actually. It's quite late. Der Stern is a fun one. Let's look at Der Stern. Der Stern, in some ways, is a little frustrating because they use the old German font, which is sometimes hard to read, and especially if you don't speak German and you don't know that, I think the things that look like F's, those are actually S's and other stuff like that. So not fantastic for the full text search, right? It's still possible to do a full text search in here. Let's see how well it can do. Well, actually, I don't know if I want to try. Okay, so there's some regular font, right? So if I was looking for Penrose, then it would show up for sure. I don't know if it would show up if it was in this old font. Eventually, they do switch over, and when you get to the later volumes, they just do it in regular text, but it's still in German. And you can see like this is just straight up the church magazine, but often at the end, they will do a kind of a from the mission section. Sometimes it was an insert though, and I don't know if it's included in every And so the 90s was probably a little bit too far. Let's go to like the 60s. So Aus den Missionen, Mission. I don't speak German, but that's basically like from the mission, right? What page was that on? Page 62. So, but there's only 36 pages, so it's probably like page 34 or something. I don't know if that's a member or a mission. It's probably a member. Here's people listed. So new missionaries, Anglocomen. Probably should have picked a language I was more familiar with. And then, so these are either like new missionaries or departing, and then departing missionaries probably, and their names and where they're from. And then often too, like these missionaries, they'll get mentioned when they arrive and when they depart, and then sometimes they'll get mentioned in the middle as well. So it's a good place to look for that. I just wanted to make sure that I'm getting to everything that I wanted to talk about here. So going back to this online resources, some of these other ones are on here because they do have missionary information, but they're somewhat limited in that they don't have everybody's in there. So for instance, we looked at my ancestor. He did not have one of these calls and departure and missionary calls and recommendation letters. But this is a really cool collection that I want to talk about. If they do have it, they should be listed down there. So let's pick somebody that's in the right time period to have one of these letters. And if we just go down under sources, under mission, taking a minute to load here. So there's his links to the registers, which we looked at those. And I don't see any letters there. Let's look at the missionaries that would have served at the same time, and then just pick one at random here. Probably not the best way to do it, but yeah, there's one. So first presidency call recommendations. So if you see that on your missionary, that's a really good thing to look at. So this one, so there's different things, right? This one is a letter from the bishop. So it's from this mission, from Edward Snow's bishop, whose name is James MacArthur, and he's like recommending him for the mission. So sometimes they're recommendations like that. Other times they're acceptance letters where the person will write in and say, "You've called me to this mission, and I'm happy to go." We just look at the collection here, and we can kind of see different examples. So here's Snow's the stick president. He's listing names of missionaries that he's going to recommend. Another section. Okay, so Cragen accepts a mission call to Great Britain and will be ready by June. So look at this. So this is cool because this one is actually in his handwriting, not typed out. And he's saying that he's gotten his letter on March 3rd, received and noted. He says that it's agreeable to my feelings and consistent with my circumstances to be called to perform a mission in Great Britain. So he's writing this acceptance thing. Now, there's often details in here that are really cool, like they'll talk about their life and their circumstances at the time and some of the reasons why they're not ready to go yet, but that they will be by the time the harvest comes in, or other details that are really interesting to look at and kind of find out more. So that's the First Presidency Missionary Calls and Recommendations. You can see it's 1877 to 1918. And just because somebody served in that time period doesn't mean that they absolutely have a letter in here. But if they do have a letter, it's worth checking out, and it should be linked. There's another letter collection. Yeah, this is it here. Missionary Department, Missionary Papers. So it's a different call number and a different letter collection. And I don't know that they've gone through all of these yet and put links to them, the missionaries. So if you don't have a letter, but the missionaries served during the time period that this is covered by, 1888 to 1928. So it's a broader time period, but it's not as inclusive too. And you notice those time periods overlap. And so it's not really clear to us as the archivists what decision was made to put one letter in one box and another letter in another box. But we get back to that if that one comes up. But those are the two collections of mission calls that are issued and received. It's a little bit misleading because it says First Presidency mission calls and recommendations, but there are almost no mission calls in this collection. It's almost always responses to mission calls. The reason being that the mission calls were made and they weren't duplicated. Copies weren't kept. So the mission call was sent to the missionary, and the church didn't necessarily keep a copy of that mission call. So if you want to find a mission call, you're going to have to look through the papers of your ancestor and hope that it's still in there. But these are the replies that are there. Let's see if this come. Okay, so yeah, this has come up. So 1888, there's some in 1898, and then there's a jump to 1901. Oh, these are kind of interesting. So this is one right here. This is a genealogy form, and I think this is where they would get the information to copy into the mission registry that we looked at before. So in some cases it's duplicate information and it's not information that you need, but you can see in here how maybe they might have messed up something, spelled a name wrong or something like that, because whoever wrote this may not have had good handwriting. This guy's handwriting is pretty good. So where they're living, who set them apart, all of that information. So those genealogy papers are in here, and they're called genealogy, even though it just the only genealogical aspect is who their parents are. And then this is more of a form letter for a mission recommendation. It's for J. Anthony Garner, and it's stake president Mark Aston that signs it there. So just some basic information. What is his knowledge of the gospel? Limited. So hopefully he was still a good missionary. There's some fun stuff in here. Back to these. I do want to talk about photographs. There's a lot of photographs. And what this is saying is like there's lots, but you're just going to have to search for them kind of separately. You can go to the catalog and why don't we just do this really quick? So on the catalog, we're just going to search for, let's just do Mexican Mission again. And the reason why I wouldn't want to search for the name of my ancestor is that it's highly likely that whatever photographs they have in the library are not labeled well enough to know who's in the photo. So I'm switching it to photographs, and there's 224, but only 100 of them are digital. So let's look at the digital ones, and we can see some of these for an example. So here's a bunch of people, and some of these, okay, so this is not about this specific image, but just about all of the images in this collection. But there's no names, there's no information. It's possible that they're missionaries. It's possible that they're actually not missionaries. They did scan the back of all of these as well, just in case there was something written on the back. It would be quite an effort, and also, just because you have an ancestor that served in the Mexican mission around this time period, I don't know if you know him well enough, know him or her well enough that you could just open it up and look. And seeing the little kids in here, it makes you wonder if these are missionaries or if they're okay. So here's John Lester Haymore is actually mentioned as one of the person, and then there's somebody else in here too. So one of these people is John Lester Haymore, and if we had that much of a hint, then what I would do if I wanted to find out the names of the other people here is look up John Lester Haymore in the Mexican mission history, find out all of the entries where he's mentioned in the history. So find out what areas he's in, and then finding those areas, you can find out who else was serving in those areas. And then if you find that this one's maybe not a good example because, like I said, there's kids, but if it was just a photograph of just like that looked like a definite missionary photograph with a bunch of elders, kind of standing together, then you could assume that they're all serving in one of the conferences of the Mexican mission. And so looking at which conferences, which areas the guy served in that you do know, then you could try to find who else was serving at the same time in those conferences with that missionary. And then knowing that, you can go back to the page and see the missionaries that are there at the same time, and then look at their photographs and say, okay, yeah, this looks like this person. It's possible that that's this person serving there at the same time. And then you can start to identify the other names of the people in the photographs. A little bit of an advanced thing and worthwhile if you can get it done, but it can be really difficult as well. So that's photographs. We did talk about the Latter-day Saint encyclopedic history, and that's that one that I showed early on that has each mission, each ward, each branch, that kind of thing. But the biographical encyclopedia is another similar thing, but just lists the names of the people. But I wouldn't go searching in this one because if they're in there, it's going to be linked from their page. And then we talked about the church periodicals. This probably sends a link to that page, right? Yeah, that's the page. Okay, good. So under online resources is a link to that page that I was talking about. I should have had earlier, but it was here all along. And then Utah Digital Newspapers is a really good one as well, not just for missionary research, but all kinds of research, because it's got all of the newspapers in Utah and pretty good coverage. And so, for instance, let's say that going back to John Robinson, if I do a search for John Robinson mission, it's possible that I will get a report in some kind of newspaper that says John Robinson has been serving in the British mission and he's arrived home. And so there's lots of Robinsons and lots of these. So maybe if I add British, if I add a space and British, and then I also, I don't have it up anymore, but it was 1877 was when he came home. So I can actually narrow it down to that time period too. And see if there's something mentioned. I don't think it would have been in an Ogden newspaper. Might have been in the Deseret News, but being that he was living down in central Utah, Ogden's not likely. So these are probably false hits from somebody else, but it's possible that he's mentioned in here. So here's a report from Great Britain, and but it's about a Protestant missionary. And then there's John and John. Anyway, so that's an example of something that you might be able to find in newspapers. It's probably more useful if the name is not so common like John Robinson, that maybe you can find something easier. That's assuming that it's there. So
here's a question from Sarah Harrington. She says, can I find the missionaries who taught me in 1976 and to 1978?
That's a great question. So yes and no. So like I said, some of these methods are useful in doing that because some of the mission histories do go quite late. I don't know that they go as late as 76, 78. So what I would do in these situations is actually try to get as much information as you can on your own. If you have a journal entry and you know their names, or if you can just remember their names or part of their names, then try Facebook, try just Googling their name, stuff like that. One thing that I found is, let's say that the missionary that baptized me was, and I don't want to pick a name that's too, I don't want to do John Robinson. Well, let's just do John Robinson, right? So what I would do is search for John Robinson, and I would include LDS, even though we don't use that anymore. Most of the internet still understands that. And then I would actually search for obituary. And what I would be looking for is my ancestor, not sorry, not my ancestor, but the missionary that baptized me, and then looking in the survived by section where they will list like their children. Because if you can find the father or mother of your missionary, then that's one step closer to, so let's say, so here we've got his daughter, his, some of these names here. And so if we were looking for Sally Rindlisbacher, whose husband's name is Jared, or maybe we're looking for Jared Rindlisbacher, right? Then we know that he's got some relation to this John David Moose Robinson. And once we know that, we know the dates that John David Moose Robinson was born and died, we can actually just look him up in Family Search. And we kind of use Family Search as our reverse social media. Some members of the church are on Facebook, but not all. But most active members have some kind of presence on Family Search. So I would go here and I would search for, because I know he's dead, John David Robinson. And birth year is 1953. And oh, we don't want, sorry, I do this every time. I don't want to search for records. I want to search family tree. So we go to family tree find. Okay. And that's where we do the search. John David, 1953. Because I'm not actually looking for records about him. I'm looking for his entry in Family Search. So we've got birth 1953 and a death of 2023. That looks like that's probably him. Hurricane, Utah, and Thatcher, Idaho. I think that's what I saw on there. So clicking through on this, we can find people that are likely related to him by looking at who's posted memories and or photos or resources or anything like that. And so I could contact this person, Lene Robinson, and say, Lene, I'm looking for John David's son, who I think might have served a mission in this area. Do you happen to know? That kind of thing, right? And so, okay, then let's see, Sarah, you got more. I know their names and the mission president name and the newsletter name. And they were younger than me. Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. So I'm not actually looking for the missionary's obituary. I'm looking for the missionary's father or mother's obituary, because then that will link me to somebody that is deceased in Family Search that I can then try to contact. And if you look at all of the changes, and you can see like who's been adding things, it's slightly possible that you'll even see the name of the person in here that you're looking for. And then you can just contact them directly. And so there's Beth. She's actually my 10th cousin, and then there's straight up phone number and email in here. So if I wanted to contact her and say, do you know the missionary that served here? That kind of thing. And that's what I found is to be the best way to try to contact people. Is the church, because of privacy reasons, they won't give out information like that anymore. You used to be able to call and get information like that. It's just too bad because most of the time people want to contact missionaries that baptize them. It's to thank them and it would be a testimony building experience to get a call from somebody that I taught and baptized on my mission. But because of privacy and other reasons, like they're just not going to do that anymore. Any other questions? Oh, there's another question in the Q&A. I have my father's missionary journals and pics from the Eastern States Mission. Would the church be interested in copying them? Absolutely. So the best place to do that is if you search for Church History Library and include donations. Then it's this gifts and donations page, which I'll post the link in the chat as well. But there's phone numbers and an online contact form that you can use to let them know what you've got and that you're interested in doing that. And I'll tell you that they will even take, like, they'll borrow it from you and digitize it and then give it back to you if you just absolutely don't want to part with it. But they would love to have the information preserved somehow. So, and then any other questions that you get, I suggest anywhere on the church's page, on the church history library page, or even the biographical database, look for this Ask Us link in the top, and then it'll send you to a question form. So that's where it is in the catalog. It's just in the upper right. And if we're on the biographical database, it's this feedback will get you in touch with people as well about missionary ancestors, and they can help answer your questions. And maybe if you have a really awkward situation with something, they might be able to help you out with clearing up some background about how is it that he's serving a mission here, even though it looks like he's not living there, and that kind of thing. So, but anyway, thank you so much for this chance to talk to everybody, and hope everybody finds this useful and they can use it to find out more information about their ancestors.